Well, we're speaking with Mark Johnson. He is the manager of faculty development for the University System of Georgia, although he is based here in Athens. And what do you do for faculty development there?
Well, I'm a manager, not the manager, but I work a lot with technology and education. My responsibilities entail a faculty development series that we conduct for system-wide faculty over the course of the academic year. And we're trying to find ways to help faculty improve their teaching, essentially. We work with there are many centers for teaching and excellence, or they call them different things around the system. But some of the smaller institutions don't have the wherewithal to have those kinds of organizations, so we try to fill in where we can with them and offer help to folks improve their teaching.
Well, in addition, in a time earlier in your life, you served as a veteran for the United States military. And unlike many Vietnam-era veterans whom we're going to be talking about in our Baby Boomers series here, you also were stationed in Korea because you were very young at the time, got into that just before, and then we're also in Vietnam. We're looking at a picture on screen right now of you in the Korean conflict. What are you doing there? Where were you stationed, and what did you do during that conflict?
That is a place called Camp Hartel, Korea, that was named after an artillery officer who earned the Medal of Honor in the Korean War. This is not the Korean War. This is what's known now as the DMZ War. We've been in Korea since the end of the Korean War. There's still one infantry division there. At that time, there were two. So if you see the patch on the left sleeve, we call that the crushed beer can. It's actually two sevens inverted. It's a 7th Infantry Division. And the 2nd Infantry Division was in the sector that I was in, was actually the 2nd Division headquarters, and I was in an artillery unit. And so our job was to support the infantry in the 2nd Infantry Division. So we were about a mile south of a village called Moonson, which was the last town before what they call the Joint Security Area, the JSA, where Panmunjom and Freedom Village, all the things that you know about from where the negotiations take place all the time.
Were you involved in combat operations?
Yeah, we were. Well, it was an interesting situation. I went to Korea because I was only 17 when I went in the Army on my 17th birthday, and you couldn't go to Vietnam until you were 18. And I was really smart, so I volunteered for Vietnam, and they didn't send me there. So
I heard that happened to a lot of veterans. Those who volunteered got sent elsewhere, and those that didn't got sent to Vietnam.
But so I did go to Korea. My father was a World War II vet, and he served in the Navy, and he went from World War II. He was an enlisted man on a destroyer, and he came home, went to the University of Illinois, got his degree, and he went back in as an officer. So during the Korean War, he was called back up and served on a destroyer in Korea. And it was kind of funny because he was relieved that I was going to Korea because he, with his military background, was pretty sure everything was pretty calm. And I arrived there in the spring of 1967, and it's, again, they call it the DMZ War, and generally they will bracket that from 1966 to 1969. But in January of '68, we had periodic incidents, and we called the North Koreans infiltrators. That was the phraseology we used for them. But they would come across the border and sometimes attack positions and sometimes just gather intelligence. So we had incidents before January 68. But then in January, which it was coordinated with the Tet Offensive in Vietnam, which is the big famous beginning of the end in Vietnam. But they sent a 30-man commando team that actually came right through our area. And it's only 30 miles from the DMZ to Seoul, which is the capital. And so their job was to go down and actually, they were in writing, was supposed to take the president of South Korea's head back to North Korea. And they got inside the city limits. They were dressed in South Korean, they changed into South Korean uniforms. And they were told that they were going to get popular support from the South Koreans. And they camped overnight, the first night they came across, and they found a couple of woodcutters. And they were trying to propagandize them and stuff, and they thought they were going to be on their side, and they immediately turned them in. So there was some indication that they knew they were coming, but they got all the way down to Seoul, and they got within 2 blocks of the Blue House, which is the same as the White House, and there was a big battle. And most of them were killed. Some of them got away. We intercepted a couple going back up. One of them survived, and it's an interesting story that he ended up being government official in the South Korean government. He got captured and he went through re-education.
Yeah, I think that's funny because I don't think most of us think of that much action in Korea at the same time as there was action in Vietnam.
Yeah.
Let's see another picture of you where you're a little more in the action of Korea. You're also, again, as you said, a very young man. and going back to look at that, what do you notice about yourself and your surroundings?
Well, I think that the thing, I'm pretty sure we had just coming off a patrol because my rifle is there, my M14, which you don't forget that. But the fact that I was smoking was interesting to me because I did quit smoking when I was in Korea, and it's so long ago, and it was just someone sent me the picture that I never knew it existed. But I know that we were, because of what I'm wearing, we were out with that. In fact, I still wear that hooded coat to Big City Bread every morning for coffee during the winter.
There's a connection.
They're really heavy-duty winter clothing.
Yeah.
So we had been out.
I think that what's one thing I've heard about vets in almost every war said that there's a lot of smoking because there's a lot of young men. It's just a lot of stress. It is a
well, and they had. I think they've
and
stopped it now, but they had cigarettes came in C rations. You got them in your pack. You opened them, and there was a pack of. I think there were 4 in the pack of cigarettes. There were cigarettes, matches, and stuff, and they were so cheap. I mean, it really was ubiquitous. But I don't think it's like that anymore. I think they really discourage it.
Yeah.
But at the time, everybody smoked.
Well, we don't have a picture of it, but it was probably something similar in Vietnam. You were a little bit older, but not much. You went within another year or two, right?
Just the next year. I came home from Korea. The other thing that, in terms of context, I think it's important for people who probably know more about the Pueblo than they did about the Blue House raid, which is what I was describing to you. But about a week after the Pueblo, or the Blue House raid, the North Koreans captured the Pueblo, which was a United States reconnaissance ship that was in the ocean, and they towed it back to Pyongyang, and Commander Bucher was the commander of that, and they held them hostage for a year. So that's an important thing to know about in terms of giving people context of what was going on then. But so I came home in April, I think, of '68, and was stationed at Fort Lewis, Washington, in an Honest John missile unit, which was weird. But the duty in the States was awful. It was the summer of '68. We were about 30 miles from Seattle, and Seattle was wide open, and it was just
hotbed of what, demonstrators and
Well,
protesters?
yeah, just
counterculture in
yeah,
general.
let's go with that. I actually went to a couple of rock festivals while I was up there. Well, at Fort Lewis, right before I came home, came home on leave to go to Vietnam. I went to what was called the Sky River Rock Festival in Lighter Than Air Fair, which was the first multi-day rock festival. So it was a really weird clash of cultures. To be in the military, they measured your hair. If your hair was more than a half inch long, you couldn't get a pass. And
a lot of people
with males
with a lot longer hair.
It was an extremely oppressive
situation.
environment,
Yeah.
For somebody that was 18 years old. So there were 3 of us in this unit that paid a guy at Post Replacement at Fort Lewis to get us into a unit that was going to Vietnam.
Really?
Yeah.
You wanted to go?
Yeah, I wanted to go. Well,
why is that?
Well,
at a time when many people, didn't want to go.
Well, I think it was, and you can, if you read Tim O'Brien's The Things They Carried, you'll read the same thing. It was either Canada or Vietnam. I couldn't. I had 18 months to go, and it was just awful being in the States. And he talks about it in a particular essay in that book that's really interesting. But he just couldn't do it to his family. He couldn't desert. It was more that kind of pressure on him, and I kind of felt the same way that my folks were real conservative, and there wasn't people talk about the fear and stuff, and I didn't really care. And it's not it's not a matter of bravery. It was more bravado and being stupid. But yeah, so we did it, and I can't take it back. That's what we did.
Well, what made your experience in Vietnam different than Korea? Then, how were the combat situations there?
Yeah.
Were you more actively in it on a daily basis?
No,
were you still in the infantry?
No, I was never in the infantry. I was in the artillery in Korea, which is why I got stationed in a missile unit, because they're part of the field artillery. But I drove a truck. I was a truck driver in both in an ammunition unit and then in the Honest John outfit. So that's really what I ended up doing. I drove a truck and a signal unit.
And where were you stationed?
We were
there in
stationed
Vietnam?
north of Saigon, and we had what they call signal shots. We had signal facilities, which are communications facilities, all over the Mekong Delta. So we would drive through Saigon, down past what's known as the Phu racetrack. There's a big racetrack on the. It's not the south suburb anymore of Saigon. It's extended quite further, but down into the Mekong Delta, and then there were a couple of ferries we actually took across the Mekong River. Which was really interesting. You took civilian ferries, and they could only put a couple of trucks on them, big army trucks. So it took forever to get down there. But basically, we were driving on dirt roads, surrounded by rice paddies, delivering supplies. I mean, it wasn't glamorous. It was just hauling stuff. So that,
But still, you did your duty. You fulfilled your obligation, and I guess many people want to know, how do you think then that affected the rest of your life? Though, even though your last job was pretty straightforward, still you saw conditions and things happen that many of us never have to witness. So
I think probably, it was twofold. I mean, one of my best friends was killed right before Christmas. He was way up north. He was in the Marine Corps, and he went in after I did. But that had a really profound impact on how I viewed the war politically. But the other thing is that from the very beginning, I mean, I went into my 17th birthday, and I was a white suburban kid from Chicago that was basically a juvenile delinquent. And half of my unit at Fort Campbell was from Chicago, and half came in from Memphis. So you had Chicago black dudes and people from rural Tennessee in the barracks at Fort Campbell. And it was really a tense situation. There was a lot of conflict. And people don't know much about, we talk about things people don't know about. It was a program that was instituted right when I went in called Project 100,000, and they took 100,000 a year individuals that couldn't meet basic Army qualifications, and it was framed by the administration as a bootstraps program. They were going to take people that had, were culturally disadvantaged and give them opportunities by putting them in the Army, and it was a real eye opener. To be in the situation. I mean, I was a troubled kid, but my father was an educator, my mother was an educator, and to get into a situation where people couldn't read. I mean, when you see on the bus in what's the movie with Tom Hanks?
Forrest Gump.
Yeah, Forrest Gump. I mean, he's on the bus going to basic training. The guys are all kind of slow, and it was never about people being bad people. It was about people being educationally disadvantaged. And culturally disadvantaged. So I saw this phenomenal inequity. If you were in college, you didn't have to go because you got a deferment, and they took 100,000 people who couldn't meet the basic requirements. So you had in my opinion, a real inequity. And that's something that drove me. It's what I got my GED when I was in Korea. And I got out of Vietnam a month early to go to college. You could get out early if you were accepted, so I went straight. I had 10 days between Vietnam and the University of Illinois. And it took me a long time. I didn't get my undergraduate degree for 9 years after I got out. And I didn't get my doctorate until I was 50. But my dissertation work, I looked at the GED, because it's important as a second chance for folks who make bad decisions or they need a second chance at life. So I think...
Need a different path, an alternative to better
in fact, I think I
quality of
mentioned
life.
that I did one of my interviews here in the library. I think Renford Archibald was still here then in the literacy program, and I did life histories of about 8 people around North Georgia who had quit school and went back to school and got their GEDs. So, educational opportunity. I mean, when you combine what I saw in terms of the inequity and then the opportunities that the GI Bill afforded, I've been a believer in education. So it really did impact me incredibly, I think, in my
Propelled
whole
you
life.
to what became your career in life.
Well, I did. Unfortunately, it's very difficult to make a living in literacy education, so I was at Georgia Tech for a couple of years when I finished my program. But, I'm doing things in education now. I'd rather be working in that field, but it's underfunded. So.
As are many things.
Right.
Well, we'll wind up with one last quick question and answer. How important is it for you to stay in touch with other veterans, and specifically Vietnam veterans? There are probably more of them than are.
Well, it's funny because I moved down here 27 years ago and from Champaign, Illinois, and I didn't know anybody, and I went back to school to get my master's. And it was just that LZ Friendly had just started, and I didn't have any friends, and I'm a really social person. And my ex-wife was an art professor, and her colleague Richard Olson was a helicopter pilot in the early 60s, and I got to know him, and he was going out to this vets camp out, and so I went out, and I got to know some people that, you know, it was a good place for me to be, to find some people with some commonality, and so there's still folks that I see from time to time. In terms of people that I served with, I've had some really interesting experiences. I've worked with technology, so I've been able to track people down through some very, very interesting circumstances. A buddy of mine who was a San Francisco fireman has been retired on the island in Hawaii because he got injured as a fireman, and it took me years to find him, but I ended up being able to track him down. And
the new technology helped you somewhat?
Yeah, it really did. So, you know, and as we talked a little bit about both of our fathers being World War II vets, as my father aged, he got more interested in going back and joining his destroyer association, and really the internet. You know,
and so do you think that Vietnam vets are going to be that way too?
Oh, they are already. I mean, there's so much. It is absolutely unbelievable. I mean, I'm on a website for the Korea thing that has just tons of content, stories and pictures, and I have home movies that my battalion commander sent me that I've posted on my YouTube channel and put there. You can't believe the stuff that's out there, because a lot of people had cameras. You don't think of it that way, but I mean, most of us had the little Kodak Instamatics and stuff like that. But a lot of people had really high quality photo equipment. You could buy it in the PX. It was really cheap. So particularly guys that were in the Navy that were in Vietnam, it's interesting when you look they were called the Brownwater Navy, but they've got just, you know, they had places to keep their stuff, so they've got cameras. So yeah, there's so much out there. It's almost mind-boggling. It's again a fire hose of information.
Well, in essence, that's probably
sorting through it is
probably a good thing for history, that we will have more documentation of what happened during the Korean conflict and the Vietnam War than we did for the World War II veterans as we move toward the future. Well, thank you so much for speaking with us, Mark. We really appreciate it.
Well, thank you.
Good luck.